We can also look at social attitudes. I think that generally, and this is something to be celebrated, that in the last 20 to 30 years, Britain has become a more liberal, tolerant country. Attitudes to sexual equality, racism, gay and lesbian rights have generally changed for the better. And I think it is true that students and student unions, with their focus on diversity and equality, have led and prompted many of those changes. They've been at the forefront of the campaigns to change public attitudes. So student unions, in my view, a force for social and societal good, yes. But what about student unions developing our future leaders and activists? Well, certainly I think student unions have historically been, rightly or wrongly, a training ground for people who've gone on into frontline politics. We could start with Jack Straw, who was president of NUS from 1969 to 1971. He's now held every top job in government except for Prime Minister. Or Charles Clarke, who was president from 75 to 77, rose to be Education and Skills Secretary and then Home Secretary. Or Stephen Twigg, president from 90 to 92, a fine schools minister who will probably forever be best remembered both within the Labour Party and beyond for beating Michael Portillo in the 1997 general election. And beyond formal frontbench politics, the list goes on. People like Sue Slipman, Trevor Phillips, David Aronovich, and they're only the tip of the iceberg. The current Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, was a sabbatical officer. My new colleague at the Department for Innovation, Universities and Skills, Delith Morgan, is a former president of ULU, Phil Woollis, Jim Murphy, former NUS presidents, both now ministers of state like myself. Now, I don't want to make the NUS sound like a training school for political elites. That, I have to say, is a concept with which I have some difficulty at the best of times. And let's as well, I think, be thankful that it's neither the École Nationale d'Administration, which has produced almost all the top politicians and administrators for decades, nor the Komsomol, the old Soviet Young Communist League, which turned out apparatchiks by the million. Of course, at various times in the past, NUS has looked more than a little like both organisations. But, he says, recovering, I don't want to make getting actively involved with student unions and NUS sound like a career move either. I know some people do see it like that. However, those people, in my view, sooner or later get found out. Although, I think there is nothing wrong, and indeed I regard it as a positive good, that if you have beliefs and you believe in politics, there's nothing wrong in developing your politics and your political capability through involvement in your own student union. But, and this is where it needs to go further, student unions train a much wider group of people than future politicians. If you scratch below the surface of many successful business people, civic or voluntary sector leaders, there is often a background in student unions. And I believe very, very strongly that if you have participated actively in your student union, you're more likely to make a positive, healthy contribution to your community. And as an individual, you make yourself much more attractive to employers. But as well as the benefit to the individual, let's also focus on the benefits to society at large. Let's really highlight student unions and their activities. I think I've made it clear already that I distrust organisations that aim explicitly to develop leaders of the future. But what I don't distrust is any organisation that aims to promote activism. And student unions certainly and most definitely fall into that category. In any democracy, the more activism we have, in my view, the better. And in this day and age of falling participation in community groups, falling turnout for elections, I think that is more important than it has ever been. Activists care about the society that they and their fellow citizens live in. Activists don't sit back and moan about it, they make an effort to make things better. It was Margaret Mead who, in my view, was entirely correct when she wrote this. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. I think that's very profound and it's absolutely true. What chance has any society got if no one cares about it, if no one believes and is willing to make the effort to translate that belief into action? Almost no one would contest the proposition that life should offer an equal opportunity to everyone, irrespective of what job their parents did or where they came from. So what possible reason could any sane person have not to struggle to bring equality about? And surely no one would disagree that there should be solidarity in this country between people of every race, creed or colour, but who could possibly believe that that will happen just of its own accord? That, in my view, is why activism is important, and that's why what student unions do to encourage it is so important. And I tell you this, once the bug of activism bites you, it doesn't go away, no matter where life takes you and how disappointed or otherwise your hopes for the world may be. And I think that's a message we need to send out very strongly. Now, activism takes many forms. One often traditionally associated with students, at least since 1968, is the protest, the march, the demonstration, the occupation. I have to say, in my experience, whether today, 10, 20 or even 30 years ago, very few students have engaged in such activities. But of course, protesting isn't the only form of activism that students get involved in. Student unions aren't just against things, and frankly, if you're just against things, you never really change things. They're for things as well. In every university up and down the country, in a process often sponsored by their unions, students are working in their spare time in a vast range of community projects, enormously to the benefit of local communities. And I can't come here to Oxford Brookes and talk about activism and not mention the Stats project. I know for a fact that through this project, many of the students here are doing an awful lot of good in a part of Oxford that very much welcomes that support. And if I may, I'd like to welcome in particular the work that you're doing in supporting and mentoring young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. We all know, and I think we all believe, that far too much of this country's talent goes to waste, not through a lack of opportunity for development, but for want of aspiration. And Stacks and other schemes like it are fundamentally trying to do something about that, as indeed is my own department's Aim Higher programme. Over the years and decades, thousands of students have carried the habit of getting involved in politics or social issues, or both, into life after university, and that's the real legacy that comes from student unions. And I think society is all the better for people who care about it, whether they're politicians or not. Student unions and NUS have taught generations of students that much, and those former students today, I think, are making positive contributions to their families and their communities as a result. Student unions also create platforms for people to come together, to interact, to socialise and to enjoy recreation. And through all of these activities, they mature and they develop as individuals. Clubs and societies, 70 at this university alone, do so much to develop non-academic interests that mark out students for life and make them richer, more rounded human beings. Some are political, some are sporting, some are religious, some are cultural. All of them help mould and develop people so they become better activists and better potential leaders. So I think it's clear from all that I've said that I believe very strongly that student unions play a positive role in creating future leaders and activists.